Hi, everyone. So I've been priming a series on oniric or dream level consciousness for a long time. Ever since I was a child, growing up in a relatively shamanic family, I would discuss my dreams with my sister and my parents, and also my grandparents, cousins, and friends. And I thought dreaming was so enrapturing, but at the same time peculiar because it was almost a double life. I had my waking life and then I had my dream life. And my dream life did not play by the same rules, didn't have the same kind of mechanics or dynamics as my waking life. When I was a child, this actually frustrated me because I could do things in dreams that were physically impossible or extremely difficult while I was awake. I required things in my waking life that I did not require in dreams, such as food. I got nothing against food. I really, I love all kinds of food. But in dreams, one can eat as much as they want without getting full. One need not eat. One can inhabit different bodies. One can, there are so many possibilities in dreams that seem out of reach in my waking life. And the richer of a dream life you have, the more your waking life can seem somewhat disappointing. Now, I don't mean my particular waking life, as in my biographical situation. I mean this physical reality that we find ourselves in. That was quite underwhelming before my grandfather began to contextualize my dream life in the context of symbolic connections with my waking life, in the context of a kind of magical training, as he called it, which, curiously enough, coincides with a term that Ra uses in their contact with Carla, Dawn, and Jim. And so this new series on oniric consciousness is going to be filled with anecdotes, recollections of dreams, analyses, which are both symbolic and specific, and generally discussing the non-terminal mechanics and teleodynamics of dreams, as I've been hinting at. Because dreams are largely non-terminal. They're not purely non-terminal. Nothing can be purely non-terminal because then you don't have any terminal instantiation. But the terminal instantiation, meaning the objects that you can manipulate and embody in dreams, are much more fluid and ever-changing. And the dynamics are much more directly linked to higher levels of syntax, which are the perceptual and emotional levels of our consciousness. Whereas in our physical reality, our physical and relational or structural levels of consciousness or syntax, where syntax can be understood as we can say, structural aspect of consciousness, are primary, relatively speaking. Of course, when we start to, as we develop in our physical bodies, we're able to eventually get to a point, hopefully in adolescence, but definitely in adulthood, when we start to allow our perceptual and emotional levels of consciousness to take primary control. Whereas as children, we're still learning how to navigate our bodies are still growing, etc. So our physical and structural levels of consciousness are primary. Ultimately, though, we want to balance all these levels, physical, structural, perceptual, and emotional. And that's what integrating your oniric consciousness into your waking consciousness is all about. So, as I mentioned, we will be discussing recollections, we'll be examining different dreams. And the point of this series is to, first of all, get you to pay more close attention to your dreams. Dreams are just beyond all words. I mean, that's part of the reason why this series is going to be a particular challenge, because most natural language, and for that matter, formal language, cannot capture dream mechanics and dynamics. Another frustration that I had as a child, which has since to some extent been abated, but not fully, and which has led me to pursue a more phenomenological version of natural language, which involves subtleties that are not strictly verbal, but are paraverbal and nonverbal, and ultimately telepathic, which natural language use is a verbal restriction or form of telepathy, But we're talking about general telepathy, where in dreams, you don't just exchange verbal or notational percepts, you exchange the full range of general percepts, which means you can communicate through event transformation, you can communicate through physical transformation, you can communicate through shared, what we would call hallucination, but would more accurately be called perceptual and emotional projection or reconfiguration. There are many, many methods of communication in dreams that we can begin to explore, and as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, are enrapturing. So, for some of us, our dreams are more terminally anchored. Those of us who are quite anchored in our physical reality and who think about our physical reality as being primary, if not the sole reality, our dreams are going to approximate what people describe when they lucid dream without having control. Lucid dreaming would be basically regenerating a similar type of physical reality without having physical inputs, right? Obviously, we're asleep, we don't have any sensory inputs. And when you're lucid, so-called, you are able to control the dream environment as one would in our waking life. But when you're lucid, you're not necessarily controlling the dream environment in the same way as when you are communicating through event transformation, through emotional perceptual transfiguration or physical transfiguration. There are limitations to lucid dreaming that we will also discuss. Lucid dreaming is an interesting activity and is a certain stage of oniric consciousness, but it is by no means the peak level of oniric consciousness. True oniric consciousness, the highest levels approximate or actually maximize what many people experience when they're on DMT trips. Because we can experience higher dimensional realities, we can experience, in fact, higher dimensional actually would mean an interdimensional slash dynamic dimensional reality where we can experience different bodies that are associated with different densities, where dimensions are actually mechanical restrictions of densities. If you're familiar with the raw contact, where densities are evolutionary cycles, different bodies instantiate different prerogatives and imperatives, and those prerogatives are embodied, and those imperatives are mentalized. And so in dreams, when we cycle through bodies, right, you can be a table, you can be a bee, you can be a planet, and the connections between those cycles, between those bodies that literally embody the evolutionary cycles, are the higher order, higher dimensional, interdimensional, etc. communication that we often wake up and think to ourselves, "Oh, that was trippy," and then we just continue living our life. There are continuities that are not linear or local in dreams. There are certain dreamscapes that connect non-locally and non-linearly. We can also get a tinge of what it will be like, very crudely speaking, to experience our after or pre-life, momentarily ignoring the fact that those temporal prepositions are inappropriate to the non-terminal domain when we are dreaming. So there are many, many, and of course we can pre-simulate scenarios. We can experience precognition. Again, pre is an inappropriate preposition, but we'll just use in the common term here when we dream. So this is going to be a broad-ranging series that I'm extremely excited to finally embark on. I will begin with one of my oldest dreams, actually. When I was a child, I would, well, let me see here. I was taught to, at the very least, remember my dreams. Now, one of the challenges with remembering a dream is sequencing it. I would realize that most dreams are non-sequential. So a series of dreams, which seem stepwise, you have one, dream two, dream three, etc. We sequence them when we wake up, but they are actually non-sequentially connected or distributive, meaning that they have non-sequential connections that have nothing to do with their ordering, which means that the dreams are being structured thematically or conceptually. Now, this dream, I felt a sense of timelessness, which was nevertheless terminally instantiated in something approximating a car's body, which was Interesting. So this was a very soothing, peaceful, eternity-inducing dream. And this was one of the oldest dreams that I remember as a child. So my, my parents used to have a minivan. I think it was a Nissan, I forget what it was, but it was one of these Nissan minivans. And in the dream, I was the minivan. Now, how did I know that? Because there was no looking down. My consciousness was literally feeling the road, feeling the drive. It was not something where I was sitting in the car and just relaxing. I was just feeling the drive itself, the ride. The outside of the car was just melting stoplights. And the drive was aimless. The drive was speedless. And therefore, the pinnacle of peace. It actually jarred me when I woke up because in this speedless, aimless, timeless experience, which again, cars don't have a timeless experience, but there are qualifications to that, but it approximated what I thought of as being timelessness. Waking up from that meant that now I had to cope with the fact that I have a certain, time dependent body. And I didn't know, it felt like I was in the dream for years and years and years and years. But I learned to, I presented this dream to my grandfather and I said, this dream is actually a recurring dream. And, what does it mean? And why do I feel so weird in my body when I wake up? And he basically told me, this is a great gift. This dream is a ballast of peace for you. So whenever you're feeling stressed or in pain, you can return to this timeless dream and you can just rest in that timelessness, which is what I do. Of course, there are other dreams that approach timelessness in a way that I can actually physically understand when I wake up, right? As a child, the way that I could physically understand timelessness was by, imagining myself to be what I thought of as an inorganic object, an object that doesn't really die, right? Like a car doesn't die. It stops functioning, perhaps. And I knew that if you, abstract all the way out to, say, 10,000 years, the car will eventually disintegrate. It'll take longer than that. But in my childhood mind, I mean, it must have been 4 years old approximately, a car was a table, things like that. They don't die. They're not alive. At least I didn't think of them as being living in the biological sense. Of course, now I understand that inorganic objects are a type of life form, but they do not die. They may decay, but their experience is what I could understand as being timeless. Since I have been experimenting with not just inhabiting different types of body, right, associated with different evolutionary cycles, but also cycling between bodies in those dreams and interpreting the connections between cycles, the connections between experiences in such a way that I can generate emotions of admiration, inspiration, peace or calmness, merriness or excitement, and other positive emotions that help me to overcome or at least face challenges in my daily life. So, many, many applications to this series. I hope you're excited as I am because this is going to be one that I produce a lot of videos on rapidly. So, thank you for listening, everyone.